Mr. Henderson?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Jim Henderson, President of the University of Louisiana System, and I want to thank you for giving me a moment to come to the mic. I know you have a long agenda, so I'll be very, very brief. But first, I want to thank you for the work of this body in giving us a year of stability. For the first time in a decade, higher education was not cut, and TOPS was fully funded. As a result, the universities of Louisiana are boasting their highest enrollment in 5 years. Our president developed a plan to create the most educated generation in Louisiana's history, to develop new public-private partnerships, and find new and innovative ways to retain and develop our faculty. I think it's important that the members have some pieces of information as you weigh this bill and other bills that may come up today. 28,000 of our 91,500 students are on TOPS. A TOPS student on average pays $3,000 above TOPS out of pocket to fund their education. Sometimes folks believe that TOPS covers the cost of education. It's not even close. They pay $3,000 out of pocket. More than 10,000 of those students are also Pell recipients. It means they're the lowest income of those we're serving. Most of those are first-generation students. TOPS is currently funded in the bill that in HB1 that passed in the regular session means those students will have to find $1,500 out of pocket or drop out of school. I just think it's important that the members have that information as you weigh the various bills that come up today and understand the impact that has on students, talent development, and the future competitiveness of our employers and our regional economies. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's it.
Can you tell me how many students today attend either higher ed or a university?
So we have 91,500 students in the University of Louisiana system. The others, you have about 45,000 in the LSU system, probably 11,000 in the Southern system. And the community college system on credit-based enrollment is about 65 to 70,000. Of course, they serve tens of thousands of more in non-credit training and adult education.
Yes, sir. And of that population, how many of those students are actually on TOPS?
At 28, in our system, it's 28,000 students, so
out of the
half of the TOPS recipients.
Out of the 91,000, 28,000 are on TOPS?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because there's a pretty good chance that we're not going to raise the entire 650 million. At least that's the way I see it. And we're going to probably have to prioritize, like what we tried to do with House Bill 1, which ultimately got vetoed. Can you give me or other members kind of a scenario of if we only raise, let's say, 350 million, and we're tasked with trying to fully fund higher ed or TOPS? I mean, how does that break down? Because you have, it looks like you said 28,000 versus your 91,000 that are actually on TOPS. Would a university prefer to see us fund higher ed, or I mean, just maybe?
That's a wonderful question, and I think you'll get a variety of answers from different members of the higher ed community. I will tell you that our universities are funded they have the lowest resource base per student in the nation.
Is that like cost per student hour?
Cost per student, yes, sir. And that's not something I say complaining. That's something I actually say with a bit of pride, because over the last 10 years, after we've seen this disinvestment, we've seen a 10% increase in the number of graduates we produce every year. We've seen 10 percentage point increase in graduation rates. Now, I attribute that to the faculty. The faculty of the lowest resource systems of higher education in the nation are doing phenomenal work. And so to say that they're fully funded, even if they're held stable, is a misnomer. They fall well below our southern regional peers in resources per student. The top side of the equation, though, this is where it gets a little more philosophical for me. Because top students, and there's a lot of merit-based discussions on what's the appropriate way to have a merit-based scholarship program. I get that. The issue is we have one. And we have criteria that we establish for existing students and for students that just graduated from high school. The students that just graduated from high school have spent 4 years with a target, because the state of Louisiana said that if you perform at this level, we're going to fund this portion of your education. Now remember, it doesn't fund all of it. Again, on average, they'll pay out of pocket $3,000, even with the TOPS award, if it's fully funded. And we have existing students that have come to our universities and they've performed. They've performed to the standards that we, the state of Louisiana, established for them. And we told them, when you perform at this level, we're going to fund this portion of your education. To me, it's almost a moral obligation for us to say the first thing that we fund from this higher education pool is fulfill the TOPS promise. Now, that's difficult to say in this scarcity equation, and I understand what you're dealing with. You've got unlimited demands on very, very limited resources. I get that, and I realize the decisions are tough. But for me, when we have 28,000 top students, remember more than 10,000 of which are on Pell Grants now, many of them are literally a dead car battery away from becoming a statistic in higher education. For us to say, even though you've performed at the level that the state of Louisiana entered a pact with you, and for us to default on that promise is unconscionable.
So if we're faced with the priority of having to do one or the other at a certain percent, is it a fair assumption to think if you give more money to fund higher ed as a whole, and let's just say more than you were even asking, would that actually bring down the cost per credit hour to students who aren't on TOPS, or ultimately are?
I'm
just asking. I mean,
it gets a little bit complicated with that because we've increased tuition and fees over the last 10 years. When I say we've led the state in disinvestment of state support, we've also led the country in increases in tuition and fees. That was one of the reasons why over the last 10 years, when $680 million was cut in total state general fund expenditures, $764 million of that came from higher education and state support. We're competing against states like Alabama that operates on $6,000 more per student than we do. And I get in trouble in some committees when I say Alabama, but I'll say it here. In Mississippi and Arkansas, they operate at almost $4,000 more per student, even the state of Texas. But if you go beyond that and just look at state support per capita for higher education, we spend $80 less per capita in direct state support of higher education than they do in Alabama. $85 less than Mississippi, $90 less than Arkansas, and even the state of Texas, with its vast economies of scale. Think about the population of Texas. They spend $20 more per capita in direct state support of higher education than we do in Louisiana. And then when you take that and you compare it against the educational attainment rate in Louisiana, where we rank 49th or 50th, depending on the measure, and you compare that to the demands of the 21st century economy. In Revenue Estimating Conference the other day, the most compelling statement that was made had nothing to do with the revenues. It had to do with the oil and gas industry. And now from 1980 to the year 2015, labor productivity in the oil and gas industry increased on an average of 2.5% per year. The last 2 years, it's increased by 30% per year. The future of work is now. The future of work is automation. It is artificial intelligence. It's robotics. And it's going to demand in every sector a more educated workforce than we've ever produced. We're starting off behind. We have institutions that are poised to deliver at a higher rate than we ever have, produce the most educated generation in our history. So in my opinion, the choice between funding institutions or funding TOPS is a false choice. I think we have to do both.
Okay. One other question. I know you had mentioned earlier about the higher ed receiving cuts, and just looking back at a trend from 2004, looks like y'all were funded around $1 billion, and then getting into looks like 13, y'all dropped down to $535 million. So you talked about being cut.
Yes.
During that time, let's say in 13, 14, and then in the following year it went to $918 million. Did y'all receive or raise fees substantially during that time to try to compensate?
Oh, yes, sir. In fact, we passed the GRAD Act, the Granting Resources and Autonomy for Diplomas Act. It was a great program. It was designed to move us up from being ranked dead last in resources per student to more in the middle of the SREB average. So for institutions that performed, they were able to increase tuition and fees by up to 10% per year. The challenge was we ran into a position where we did what was called the fund swap. And so then that 10%, whatever amount that generated in gross dollars, was removed from institutions in terms of direct state support. The problem is gross tuition and revenue dollars don't hit the bottom line because there's about a 25 to 30% discount in terms of institutional aid and scholarships. So it was a net reduction for us. 2004 is a great year to look at because it's before the recovery economy that happened. If you do state support, total support to our institutions from 2004 going to now, and you use the CPI indicator, we're down about $350 million.
Okay, so going into this fiscal year, y'all were funded again right at $1 billion. So it has gone up, and I think you mentioned that being fully funded. Did y'all lower any fees or as far as tuition goes, y'all just kept those things high? Whenever y'all were cut, y'all went up. And then when y'all were fully funded, y'all didn't go down.
We weren't fully funded, we just were held stable.
No, y'all funding was increased by it looks like about $80 million from the last
includes
fiscal.
TOPS. That's the TOPS
Okay.
full funding. And remember, previously, and this distorts some of the numbers that y'all look at, TOPS was not part of the higher ed budget. It was moved into the higher ed budget, I believe, in 2010 or 11, 2010.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions.
But, Mr. Representative, I will tell you that we had the lowest tuition and fee increase. Several of our schools did not increase at all this year. On average, we had a 3% increase, which makes us still amongst the lowest in the southern region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Ms. Starnes, thank you.